Dean.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jen Crow. I'm one of the ministers here at First Universalist Church, where Gail and Stuart have been a part of this community since 1968. Each of them has served in leadership in multiple ways here, from the Board of Trustees to some of our earliest sexuality educators for youth, to Gail's leadership in religious education here for many years. It matters that we arrive together here, in this place of meaning, of shared history, of community and care and connection, surrounded by the love and the legacy of generations. We arrive here today knowing both joy and sorrow. Joy for the life that Gail lived and the life we got to live with her in it. Sorrow for the loss of her physical presence with us now. We hold both of these, joy and sorrow, together in tandem, and we know that we have the gift of celebrating a full and fulfilling life. So it is today that we are surrounded by beauty and family and friends, by music and poetry and stories and art, as we gather to mourn the death and celebrate the life of Gail Taylor Hanson, beloved wife and mother, sister and daughter, grandmother and aunt, dear friend, adventurer, artist, advocate, member of this and so many other communities. Gail touched many lives, and our hearts are heavy with her loss. And we gather today, not just to mourn, but to celebrate as well. We celebrate a lifelong love story and friendship between Gail and Stuart. We celebrate a life full of travel to all 7 continents and all 7 seas. We celebrate a life full of learning, of 4 degrees in 4 different decades, of book clubs, and a notebook tracking all of the books she ever read. We celebrate a life full of creativity and artistry, of watercolor and fish rubbings and flower arranging, of needlepoint and quilts, and so much more, each marking the important milestones in the lives of her family and friends. We celebrate a life of being present, of making magic, of knowing what she wanted and making it happen, a life of clear yeses and nos all the way up to her death. Through her living and her artistry, her love and her stories, Gail's life has shaped our own and this world, and we are grateful for it. We are fortunate, just as she so often said about herself, fortunate to have known and been known by her, fortunate for the gift of her life interwoven with ours, fortunate to know friendship and family connection and a commitment to knowing and loving this larger world. May our hearts be open today as we share in poetry and story and symbol and song as we celebrate Gail's life together. And we pause now, as we do each time we gather in this sanctuary, to kindle the flame of our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism and of the light that shines through each and every one of us, the light of Gail's life that now lives on in each of us. I invite you to join with me in saying the words for the chalice lighting if you would like. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. As we gather surrounded by the beauty of music and family and friends, comforted by the rhythms of life and love and loss that we have known for generations, we pause too to acknowledge the grief that lives with us now. With our joy, With our love and with our loss comes grief, too. Gail mattered to each of us and to this world, and we are already missing her presence. We know that her death will affect each of us differently, and that grief will take shape differently, too. It may come as sadness, as memories, as longing, as fatigue, as a feeling of distraction or heaviness. All of these feelings and so many more will come and go. Sometimes they will surprise you, other times they will arrive right on schedule as you encounter the many firsts that are to come without Gail here at your side. My hope for each of you is that you might be gentle with yourselves and with each other in your grieving, that you might be curious with it, that you might give it room to take the shape that it does, giving it air and time and gentleness, that you might make room for the memories and the feelings to come when they do, and for all the different ways you might feel. To be curious, to bring tenderness, to trust that grief is a natural part of life, and our bodies and our spirits know how to do it. We know how to grieve, how to love, how to lose, and how to go on. This is part of who we are as human beings. And we are now a part of the largest company in all the world, the company of those who have known love and the company of those who have known sorrow. The Reverend John Cummins, the minister emeritus of this church, once wrote, "The dark night of the soul, those places of death, of bitter remorse and sorrow and pain and loss and endings and pointlessness and despair and silence, they are not what they seem. They are growing places where the seeds of humanity are silently gathering strength down there in the dark for what Robert Frost called our ever-breaking newness." Reverend Cummins used to say, "There is but one place where time and death have no dominion, and that place is love." May we know the ever-presence of love with us today and always. May we trust that we are gathering strength for an ever-breaking newness in our lives and in this world. And may we open our hearts, minds, and ears to the stories that are to come. I'd like to invite Marta and Kelly to come share some remembrances.
Thank you all for coming. I've been grief-stricken, but the process of putting this celebration of life together and the exhibition below has been cathartic. And not just that, every single one of you who have showed up today, all of you who have helped me with the photograph, with the bringing of a quilt, with an encouraging word, have brought joy to me. I am feeling joyful. So I'm crying, but I'm really feeling truly joyful. And I wanted to thank each and every one of you for showing up for the Hanson and Taylor family. Now I want to switch over to my words, you know. Academic, I have to type everything out. So a few decades ago, oh my God, has it been that long? When I was living in San Diego, friends of mine asked me if, you know, what, well, not, you don't know yet, but anyway, what were my 3 favorite animals? And just casually, they encouraged me to say something about each animal. So now I encourage all of you here today to think about the animals that come up within yourselves. 3 of them. And I want you to think about each one, you know, to yourself. If we had more time, I'd have you talk to your neighbor like we do in UU Church and introduce yourselves. But we don't have time to do that because we have a lot of people coming up. So the life of the mind, interior. So think of those 3 animals and why you like them. And the order is important too. So first I said the polar bear, and half joking I explained that I felt as out of place in Southern California, being a Minnesotan, as I thought that the polar bears felt in the San Diego Zoo. And later on I learned that in fact they had to give them Prozac. Well, I didn't need Prozac, but okay. And then I said, I really like their fierce survival instincts and that they were so tender with their family and especially their cubs. Second, I said dogs because they're loyal and they make good companions. And I said whales. I think my friends were like, whales, because they rule the vast oceans and they have a language we humans don't understand. Some humans are learning it, but most of us don't. Then they informed me that according to a Native American tradition, the first animal represents how we present to others. The second animal presents or represents how we think of ourselves. And the third animal represents our deeper selves. So pause with that a moment for yourselves and the three animals that come up from within. Shortly after Mom passed away, I received this quote condolence from a friend. Quote, "We have a very vivid memory of her when you, with so much loving respect, referred to her as Mother Bear. Indeed, I often thought of Mom as a protective mother bear, but also as a wise, introspective owl. And she herself loved fish, as anybody who's been to our cabin will know it's designed around a fish theme. And of course, below, you'll see many examples of her fish-themed art. She did indeed have qualities associated with the bear, the owl, and fish. But instead of drawing from Native American traditions of totem animals, I prefer rather to go to the Greco-Roman tradition, as Mom loved Latin. She told me when on her deathbed she was excelled at Latin, loved Latin in high school. So I'm like, well, that might be where I got my language skills. But also, it also served her very well in crossword, in Scrabble, any kind of word games, as anybody who's ever played any games would know. She was very competitive and also a good team player. But let me return to the ancient Greeks and Romans. They crafted gods and goddesses out of the full range of attributes that they saw in the humans that lived among them. Goddesses especially captured qualities observed among the strong, formidable women of the ancient world. And each goddess also had an animal associated with her. And so now I shift to my poem. It came to me while riding up to the cabin with Kelly. I had been thinking about it because I'm not a poet, and I normally don't write poetry. My father has become one, but poems have come to me in very emotional periods. When my grandfather died, I wrote one. When my dear grandmother died, Grandma Fran, I wrote another one, and I spoke just like I am today. And I was troubled because it just wasn't coming to me. I think I was just too busy with so many other things. But then it suddenly came. Bear, owl, fish. Artemis in Greek, Diana in Latin, goddess of the hunt, nature, wild animals, childbirth, and the care of children. Portrayed with a bear, you are powerful. Mom, peace finds you in the woods, formidable protector of your offspring, as you were with us cubs and your grandcub. Unconditional love, generous beyond all expectation. When someone expected to share anger and to commiserate over also having a gay daughter, you instead shared how you felt, that you simply knew your daughter better. Fiercely loyal to your family too, no matter what trials or tribulations. Unwavering protector and caregiver of your mother when she needed you. Though, through how you were with Grandma, you taught me how to be with you. When you too needed a mother's bear's tender loving care. Owl. Athena in Greek, Minerva in Latin, born from the mind of the king of gods, Zeus, goddess of wisdom, philosophy, the mind. Portrayed with an owl, you thrive alone with your thoughts. Mom, peace finds you in a book or creating, as you are also the prolific goddess of handicrafts. Trying out Japanese watercolor and Gyotaku fish prints, you instead embraced the fiber arts, knitting, needlepointing, and quilting, your myriad relationships into a vast legacy of material manifestations of your unwavering love and extraordinarily beautiful mind. Fish. Aphrodite in Greek, Salacia in Latin, beautiful wife of Poseidon. Not easily wooed, but once won steadfast. Goddess of the ocean and all maritime life. Mom, peace finds you in the water, among your many schools of fish, fun-loving and loving Gamma Phi Beta sisters, inquisitive friends of the couple book club, deeply engaged couples in your so-called bridge group, fellow activists in the League of Women Voters, kindred spirits of the small quilt club. Dearest Artemis, mother bear of your tight-knit family, creative Athena mind, goddess of handicrafts for your extended family, Aphrodite, devoted wife of Poseidon, singular fish among your many circles of friends. Peace finds us with you now, in the woods, in a book, creating and swimming among those who also give our lives meaning. Now I'd like to transition to remembrances from all the dimensions of Mom's life, representing our mother bear, Mom's immediate family, representing our owl, Mom's extended family, and representing our fish, Mom's many friends. Thank you.
Hard to follow that. Not quite as academic. I have a reading that I'm going to read that someone else did. I'll try and get through as best I can and in her voice. And then those are my notes, so bear with me. Thank you all for being here today. This is really quite an amazing event for all of us, and to see all the people in Gail's life who showed up today, and imagine all the people who didn't show up today. So, thanks. This is a tribute to Gail Hanson from Carla Kilkelly, a fellow quilter and SMG member. It was early 1990s. I was a fairly new quilter. I had joined an organization called Minnesota Quilters, excited to know that there were other people who liked to quilt out there in the world, somewhere. I received a phone call out of the blue from a woman who identified herself as a member of the Minnesota Quilters. She said she was trying to put together a small quilt group for people from the South Minneapolis area. She said she had a group of people who would be meeting at her house, gave me her address, the date, and time. I was thrilled. Having a small group of people to learn from and to share techniques sounded great. Despite working part-time with a fairly crazy schedule, I made sure I would be able to attend the meeting. We were met at the door and ushered downstairs into a panel-finished basement to a room ringed with folded chairs. A woman who had contacted all of us had handed out a list of people along with phone numbers, no email back then, mind you, and then gave us materials to make a small pincushion made with the cap of a soda bottle cap, and circle of fabric and some stuffing. Memories of projects I had made as a Girl Scout came to mind. At the end of the meeting, she announced that we would meet the third Thursday of each month from 1 to 3, and that we would be going through the list alphabetically, with each subsequent person on the list being responsible for hosting the meeting and coming up with a project for the group to work on. Wow. This lady was apparently a wannabe drill sergeant. These are not my words. It's real. On our way to our cars, there were a few grumbles among people, but none of us really knew one another. We were all excited to have met other people interested in quilting, and it seemed the organizer had a few longtime friends in the group. I showed up to the second meeting because I really wanted to be part of a small quilt group. There were fewer of us than the first time. After the meeting got going, Gail spoke up and said, I'm thinking this would work out better if there were a little flexibility in who is responsible for hosting each month. For instance, I am unavailable in March, but would be happy to host a different month. At this, the organizer, who remained anonymous, flew into a rage. I knew you were going to be trouble, Gail Hanson. I'm not sure how she knew that ahead of time, but I was in awe of this Gail person, speaking her mind when I knew full well that several of the rest of us felt the same way, but were too timid to face off against this bully. We tolerated the group another month or so, and then quietly made a splinter group of select defectors, adding a few more quilters some of us knew from other classes we had taken. We were officially known as the Minnesota Quilters Directory as the City Stitchers. Gail used the initials SQG to denote our meetings on her calendar, with her interpretation of these letters being small quilt group. We have been going strong for more than 30 years now. And at one time, she had at least one member in each decade of life, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. The rule for our quilt group, no rules. Doesn't get any better than that, y'all. The prehistory of this group reminds us that flexibility is key and that there are no got-to-do-this group projects. We have had a few cooperative ventures, but no one is required to join in on any project. Each month, when we meet, we share what we have accomplished, what we are working on, and what we were planning. We ask for constructive comments and share advice. We learn so much from what one another is working on. When our small quilt group began, Gail was a fairly new quilter. The purchase of the cabin spurred her into thinking that quilts would make the perfect coverings for beds, and a fish-themed wall hanging would be the perfect complement to a wooden bowl she had purchased for decoration. She also made the decision that on each label of her quilts, she would number them, starting with number 1 for her first creation, number 2 for the second, etc., etc. Most of the rest of us in the group at that time had already made a fair number of quilts. So although agreeing it was a cool idea, knew we probably couldn't go back and accurately number what we had already made. But we saw Gail work through number 1, number 2, number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And when we lost count, Gail did not. What an inspiration to the rest of us to do a better job documenting what we have made. Gail was fearless when it came to taking on new projects, trying out new ideas, working with difficult fabrics, making a huge quilt, or accepting a challenge of any kind. She was always gathering signatures for a wedding quilt or a graduation quilt or an anniversary quilt, and then putting it together in record time to deliver to the intended recipient. She would pore over patterns, look at the perfect quilt, or showcase something else. I remember a family tree quilt that she made for a family reunion. She worked and worked on a design for it on paper and then in fabric, designing the leaves and then the trunk of the tree itself. There was a quilt at the Minnesota's Quilt Show in Duluth this past summer that must have taken inspiration from Gail's design because it was very similar, including the twisted fabric stripes used for the bark of the trunk branches of the tree. During Stu and Gail's travels, many travels, she collected beautiful ethnic fabrics and found wonderful ways to combine those. Japanese, African, Aboriginal. She made quilts for Halen, dependent on what his latest passion was at the time, #1 grandson. In 2025, Gail agreed to be the president of the Minnesota Quilters, which at that time was an entirely volunteer-led organization putting on the largest all-volunteer quilt show in the United States. It was not a role to be taken lightly, since it is a multiple-year commitment involving being president-elect, president, and past president. In the middle of planning for the annual quilt show, the quilt show coordinator quit. So Gail had no option but to take on this huge role herself. Putting her organizational skills to good use meant she pulled things off beautifully, but it speaks to Gail's graciousness that she did not grumble, at least not in public, about so-and-so letting her down or causing her to take on several volunteer positions requiring more hours of work than a full-time job would have. Gail called us the Small Quilt Group, SQG. That S could also stand for quite a few things. I call this group my serious quilt group because all of us in the group are quite serious about improving our quilting skills. All of us have different talents, sense of color, willingness to take risks, precision, piecing, and applique skills, amazing artistic interpretations. Each of us brings unique perspectives to the group, and we all learn from one another. Another member values the group as a sharing quilt group. During our time together, there is a lot of sharing that is not necessarily quilt-related, or bonbon eating, talking about our joys and our sadnesses, and listening without being judgmental. Working on something quilt-related brings us together, but our sharing is what keeps us together. Besides admiring Gail's quilting creations each month, as well as her needlepoint masterpieces, we miss Gail's sense of humor, her leadership abilities, her honesty. I didn't write this. Her fearlessness, her tales.
You're doing great. Just breathe. Okay.
One more sentence.
Shall we take it?
No. Her tales of travel, her generosity, her hospitality. Sorry.
It's fine.
The list goes on and on. You touched all of us, Gail. Thank you. I don't have any else to say.
Thanks, Kelly. Sure. Thanks, Kelly. Peter and Halen and Eileen.
Well, I don't know, Kelly, that's a hard act to follow too. So I have a couple stories that are kind of family legends a bit that some of you may have already heard, but things that we remember about Gail. And it all started from the beginning for me. Gail was 9 months pregnant. She found out she had a breast lump. And they took her to surgery to take the lump out. This is what they did back then. And she didn't know what was going to happen. She wasn't sure what they would find when they put her to sleep. But when she woke up, she found out it was a benign lump. And soon after that, I decided that it was time to get out of there. Apparently, I didn't like the anesthesia, so I was born soon after that. 6 weeks later, we had to go to Japan. Dad was enlisted in the Navy, and he happened to be in training, I believe, in San Diego. And Gail had to meet him in San Francisco by plane with 2 young children, both under 2. So they only gave her 1 seat. So it was Gail with Marta, who was a year and a half, and I was 6 weeks old. I had to wait till I was 6 weeks. I couldn't fly until I was 6 weeks. I remember hearing that for my whole life, that we flew when I was 6 weeks old. She was very glad to see Dad when we got to San Francisco. I don't know if she was happy with him, but she was glad to see him. So when we came back from Japan, we lived out in Fort Snelling, and I was in preschool. My mom sent me to preschool at Montessori, which was every day, and I had to go every day, which I still don't really like to go to work every day. And I told my mom I didn't want to go to school every day, and the teacher said, well, he has to learn how to go to school every day. And my mom says, well, he doesn't have to now. So she took me out of that school, and we actually went to the preschool at the First Universalist, and it was only a couple days a week. I could handle that back then. And then when I went to kindergarten, we moved over to Lake Harriet and went to kindergarten at Barton. It was a half day. I could handle a half day of every day. But I came home, and my mom was there when I got home. She was there for me. The other thing that Mom did was she taught us different things. And one thing she taught us was the power of organized labor, which maybe my Aunt Eileen maybe understands this. But she was working pretty hard when I was in grade school, and she had a job as a special education teacher, and she would come home and get things ready for the family and make dinner and apparently set the table and do the dishes and all of that. But she had had enough of that, so she went on strike. She had dinner for herself, but not for us. We're like, hey, what's going on here? What is going on? So we had to step up, and Marta and I took turns setting the table or doing the dishes. We had a dishwasher, but we were, quote, doing the dishes. And we actually had it on the calendar because we had fight about who had to set the table and who had to do the dishes. And Dad started cooking on Fridays. He had a half day off, so he would get the menu from the paper on Thursday and then get the food on the way home from work and cook on Fridays. And he would also cook on Sunday morning. So we all did our share to help out after Mom went on strike. But she also taught me how to cook. I don't know if it really took, because I don't really cook that much, but I learned how to bake. I made brownies and cookies when I was in school. And I had to learn how to cook several meals when I was in college and med school. One of them was turkey tetrazzini, which is still one of my favorites, but I haven't made it for a long time. And in med school, I'd have to cook once a month. So I was living at home, and Mom was like, okay, it's your turn to cook. But she would always help me. So I didn't have to do it by myself. She was there. She was like, what? Okay, let me help. Let me show you how to do that. So she was teaching me, but helping me along the way, which I appreciated. She also taught me how to needlepoint when I was in grade school. And there's a needlepoint pillow down there of a stag that I made when I was in 6th grade. And I think, like my mom, I kind of took that to the next level and started making more needlepoints, including needlepoint Christmas decorations, which some of you are familiar with. And maybe I went a bit above and beyond, like Gail would do, and I made a needlepoint of Gene Simmons from Kiss, and I gave it to Bruce Thompson in 6th grade. He probably thought I was kind of strange, which I probably was, but it was pretty cool. I designed it myself. But one of the things that I think I take from Gail, and probably the needlepoint, she made these huge needlepoint rugs. Like, who would do that? Like, a pillow, I can understand that, but a rug, like, it's just gonna take forever. But you have that perseverance. You start a little bit at a time, and you just go back to it and put it away and come back and do a little bit more, which kind of reminds me of what I do on my ski trails back in Nevada, which some of you may be familiar with, that I'm creating something and working on it a little bit at a time. Try not to think about everything that needs to be done, but just picking up little things here and there, and it makes a difference. The other thing I think about with her quilts is most of it was herself, doing it herself and coming up with a design and working herself, but sometimes she would include others, like with our reunion quilts, which are downstairs, where she would have us make a square and then we'd put it together. Or the wedding quilts, where she would ask people to bring fabric, and she would take that and then put it all together, which is somewhat like what I do. Sometimes I can get someone to help me, and they help, and I get a lot done, but mostly I'm just doing it by myself. But it's helpful to have other people involved with those projects as well, and they would have ownership in whatever you create, and they're part of it. The other thing I think she taught us to do was to live. And part of that was traveling. We went to Europe and South America and then Africa on a trip. We went to Alaska for her 80th birthday on a cruise. Last year, I was able to go on a cruise around the Great Lakes with Mom and Dad, and she would say, "I'm so glad you're here with us." So it was really special to spend that time with her last year. And I think she taught us how to die. She said she didn't want to live to be 100 years old. She had a good life. She was happy with her life. She wanted to die in her sleep, which is exactly what she did. Thank you.
All right, I don't have any notes, because if I do have notes, I get lost in them and then don't remember what I was going to say, because the notes distract me. So I'm just going to say a couple things. We had a family reunion. What was it? In October, where me, Marta, Kelly, Grandpa, and Dad had a little toast to Grandma, and we each said something that we loved about her. And I said that, sorry. I said that every time that I would get up, whenever she was visiting us, she was on the couch waiting for me on her iPad. And I would say, "What are you playing?" And it would always be solitary or crosswords or some fun little game. And she would always play the games with me, and she would let me play with her, because otherwise it would be too easy for her. So she would let me play the game, and she would help me. And then Grandpa told me that she would always prioritize getting up early to spend time with me. And that made me really happy to hear that, because I never knew that. So that's all I'm going to say for that. I had something else, but I forgot what it was, so. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Eileen Hanson Kelly, otherwise known in our South Minneapolis neighborhood where we grew up as Stewie's little sister. So I knew Gail for over 61 years. Years full of memories that I will cherish forever. And I want to share 3 memories with you today that were special to me as we celebrate the life of this amazing woman. How I first met Gail. Now, Stu and I grew up in a very Swedish family. Our parents were the children of Swedish immigrants. And if you had any Scandinavian ancestors, you probably remember lutefisk. Our family obligation on Christmas Eve was to have lutefisk. Now, our parents claimed they liked this gelatin-like, white, slimy, somewhat smelly form of cod soaked in lye. As for us children, not so much. However, we were told to eat it in honor of our Swedish ancestors, who trekked halfway around the world, left their homeland to come here to have a better life for their children, and eventually their grandchildren, us. So every Christmas Eve, we had lutefisk with the grandparents, sometimes twice a day, with the Hanson grandparents in the midday and the Larson grandparents in the evening. Now, in the early 1960s, our dad was transferred to the East Coast, New York City, and our family settled in New Jersey. Now, Mom had a hard time finding lutefisk in this mostly Italian suburb. Very resourcefully, she finally found it in a Swedish shop in New York City. So I know that we always came home for Christmas. We were away at school doing our thing, but we came home for Christmas. But in 1962, Stu decided to stay in Minneapolis. He was finishing his last year at medical school at U of M. Now, I know my parents really missed him around the lutefisk table that year. On Christmas Day, Stu called to wish us a Merry Christmas. So Mom asked, "What did you do on Christmas Eve?" Long pause. I could only hear her side of the conversation. "You had lutefisk? And rutabaga?" That's a side dish called a Swedish turnip, sometimes a side dish for lutefisk. "Where was that?" Mom asked, puzzled. "You had an invite to the Taylors?" Now, we didn't know any Taylors in Minneapolis. And then there was some well, that would be fine. When the call ended, Dad and I were informed that Stu was coming for a visit between Christmas and New Year's and bringing a young lady friend with him by the name of Gail Taylor. Her mother was also of Swedish heritage and had invited him to their annual Christmas Eve dinner at the Taylor home, where he did indeed have lutefisk. Stu arrived with Gail a couple of days later, and I was thrilled that he had such a lovely traveling companion. They did not announce any long-term intention, but I was hopeful that this lovely, smart woman would be the right partner for my brother. A couple months later, they announced their engagement, and Gail asked me to be one of her bridesmaids. I was thrilled. Our parents moved back to Minneapolis just in time for the June 16th wedding, and from then on, the Hansons spent every Christmas Eve at the Taylors, enjoying the fellowship of this large Taylor family and the lutefisk tradition to honor our ancestors. And when Gail's mom was unable to host such a large gathering, the lutefisk dinner moved to Stu and Gail's. And Gail was a great hostess and organized a team of helpers to make every event a memorable one for all, even the new children in the family who didn't like lutefisk. Gail was indeed the queen of hospitality. It was one of her special superpowers. Over the years, she hosted many memorable family occasions. In my own memory bank were my first wedding, our parents' 50th anniversary celebration, Dad's 80th birthday party, and several Hanson reunions. My second memory to share about Gail was how she lifted me up when my first marriage fell apart. I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time, and I hadn't told my parents that my life was unraveling, that I felt like a complete failure. I had no job, no secure income, and my self-confidence was shattered. They said, "Why don't you come home for a while?" And when I arrived in Minneapolis, Gail said to me, "You will need to find a job. So we need to find some professional clothes for you to wear for your job interviews. Come upstairs. Let's see what's in my closet that might work." Soon she was combing through her extensive wardrobe, looking for something that might fit the bill. After finding several items, we settled on a beautifully tailored blue and white tweed suit. It fit perfectly. And then Gail said, "Let's go shopping tomorrow. You'll need a blouse to go with it and some accessories." Sensing my anxiety about job hunting, she added, "I know you can do this." So we went shopping on her dime. That suit and her kindness and encouragement helped restore my self-confidence, and I thought it every time I wore that suit. The third memory I want to share is about Gail's quilts. Now, you've heard a lot and you've seen some of her remarkable work. When I finally found my true love and married Ed in 1995, Gail served as my attendant. To celebrate the occasion, Gail crafted a beautiful blue, purple, and green wedding gift. I was told it was an early quilt, number 4. In the decades to come, Gail became a master quilter and designed and executed over 220 quilts of all sizes and themes to celebrate the milestones of those she loved and who loved her. Many of those quilts are here today on display. She shared her talents with others by teaching and encouraging new quilters and becoming a leading voice in the Minnesota Quilters and serving as its president. Gail cherished her large extended family, many of whom are here today, and that included the Hanson family. At one of our Hanson reunions, Gail said, "I can create a Hanson family tree quilt," which we have on display here today. She designed a tree firmly rooted in the soil of Brunswick, Minnesota, where our Swedish immigrant grandparents settled back in 1900 and raised their 8 children. Each one is represented on the quilt by a strong limb. And out of each limb grow smaller limbs and then leaves, each one representing a member of the family. Gail carefully researched the birth dates of each person and the wedding dates of new couples and the date of death that they passed on. As new leaves came into the family through marriage or birth, they were added on. And those who came with children from previous marriages, such as my stepchildren, they were grafted into the family tree as well. The quilt is proudly displayed at our Hanson reunions, and we feel the loving arms of our ancestors who left their homeland so we might live and thrive in this land of opportunity. Gail, I like to think our respective ancestors would be pleased to know that our families came together over lutefisk. I understand that the Christmas Eve feast of lutefisk has been replaced by another less smelly fish some years ago. Thank you, Gail, for being such a loving and supportive partner to my brother. Thank you for caring for our parents, Art and Fran, especially during their aging years, and for giving them 2 amazing grandchildren, Marta and Peter, and a wonderful great-grandson, Halen. Thank you for welcoming my husband, Ed, and Marta's wife, Kelly, into the family, along with Halen's mother and stepdad, Elise and Rob. Thank you for sharing your superpowers of hospitality, encouragement, and love of family that will live in my heart forever.
Bob and Sue and Gretchen and Bert, will you come forward?
First, a note to Eileen. You'll be thrilled to know that engaging aroma of lutefisk cooking in the house can now be acquired in scented candles. I'm sure you can find them online. All of you may. Well, I don't know that I want to go there, but you might. Thank you. My first memory of my sister Gail was when I was 3. Gail was 5 or 6. She was leaning forward, hands on her hips, chewing out some older kid who was picking on us. That was Gail, fearless, leaning in, taking charge. Gail was the matriarch of our family. She was the one to take the initiative, marshal the troops, get things done. When our mother, Hilda, could no longer host the traditional Christmas Eve gathering, as others have said, Gail took over. She and Stuart hosted the multitudes for several years. She also organized the annual Christmas gift lottery, drawing names from a hat and letting us know who we were assigned to gift that year. And as Mom's health declined into Alzheimer's, Gail and Marta took on much of the weight of watching over her. It was Gail who mobilized a multitude, her siblings, including Sue's brother and his wife, and a couple of cousins, to buy a log cabin on Lake Namakogon in northern Wisconsin. And as evident by the artful display here today downstairs, she's the one who got us all to contribute squares of cloth that she skillfully stitched together in the breathtakingly beautiful quilts she gifted to so many of us on our milestones of life. And now, she's done it again, called us together from hither and yon to celebrate her life, the catalyst for yet another gathering of this, her beloved family of relatives and friends.
The road not taken. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth.
Then took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that passing there had warned them really about the same.
And both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back.
I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverge in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
I don't have anything prepared to say, so I'll just ad lib. But Gail was my youngest sister, and I was her youngest brother. I was the baby of the family. Sandy and Gail were pretty much gone from the house by the time I was even aware of them. There's a couple of things I would like to apologize for. One was they had a vanity in their room, and where they did their girl things, and I stole 7 cents from them and went to the Gould store and bought a fudgicle. And I don't think they ever knew that. Another thing I did was I noticed that there was some kind of little, like a scissors, but it kind of had a little basket on it. And I gathered that it was for curling your eyelashes. And I tried it. And I looked really beautiful. Later on, I'm not sure how old I was, but I would like to think that I was 3 or 4, but I was probably more like 8 or 10. And Gail and her boyfriend, Stu, were going to go skiing at a ski resort called Trollhagen, I think. And I'm sure that they were in the midst of a very heated romance. I didn't know at the time, but I was kind of hoping I'd get to go skiing with them. And they were getting in the car, and I was in the living room looking out the window and pretty much blubbering, tears going down my face as they got ready to drive away. And all of a sudden, they just kind of didn't drive away, and they came in and they got me, and they took me with them. Big sacrifice. I'm sure they were expecting to have a very romantic ski day and travels to, I think it's Wisconsin. My first time ever skiing. Gail encouraged me to join a obstacle course on the Bunny Hill. And I'd never worn skis before, but we rented all of our equipment, and I did my part, and I actually won. I don't know if it was first, second, or third, but it's a thing where you have to skinny across a log and get down on your haunches and go through a tube and go backwards and all of the things I could do because I was on flat ground. Anyways, then so Gail took me into the gift shop, and I got to pick out a prize for, I think, maybe it was third place, but it was a really nice prize. I got an auga horn that clamped onto my poles. Then there was another event where these seasoned Norse skiers would get into canoes and canoe down the slope, which seemed fun but crazy. And there's like 3 or 4 guys in a canoe, and we were kind of standing and watching, and well, one of them was careening down, and we were going, wow, wow. And then they were heading towards a big pine tree, and we were going, whoa. And sure enough, they crashed into the pine tree, and one of them broke their leg, a couple of them jumped out, and somebody said, is there a doctor in the house? Is there a doctor? And that was the first time I knew that Stu was a doctor, or at least studying to be a doctor, and he had to set this fellow's leg. So, so that was probably the first time I ever met you. But so then shortly thereafter, my sisters were gone, and I don't feel like I ever really got to know them, but certainly Gail has lived one spectacular life, and I got to live it a little bit with her during the seasons, Christmas and Easter and whatnot. But I appreciate so much who she was, and I'm glad to get to know her more via her quilts and the stories I'm hearing. I'm totally amazed at my older, younger sister.
And I'm Gretchen Taylor. I'm married to Bert. I met Gail in 1973 when I was 22, and I fell in love with her youngest brother at first sight at the Walker Art Center. We were both taking an art appreciation class. That Christmas, I got to meet the entire family, and I am of Swedish heritage too. My last name was Larsson, and at our grandmother's we would have, some lutefisk and other, but there that first Christmas it was like, wow, everything here is white. It's the fish, it's the rutabaga, it's the potatoes, it's the buns, it's, and the gravy. And so but that was a wonderful Christmas. I got to meet all of Bert's family and fell in love with them also, and have loved them ever since. Though when Gail fell and broke her pelvis at the cabin in Cable, Wisconsin last Memorial Day, she was in the hospital up there and for a short time, and then Stu drove her here back to Minneapolis, and she was in the hospital. So when I prepared to go visit her, I looked for a card in the house. I really couldn't find anything that seemed appropriate. So I thought, well, I'll just make her one. So it took only a few minutes for me to come up with some descriptors that would go along with the letters in her name. A really simple way to make a card, starting with G, of course, for Gail. So I thought I would just share those descriptors today, as they came so easily into my mind as I thought about her. So here we are, and you'll hear some themes given the other speakers earlier today. So G is for generous, kind, giving. When you look at these quilts downstairs, and they're just a small portion of all the quilts she ever made, but these predominantly are the quilts that she made for family to commemorate important times in their lives. She was so generous with her time and her talents to do that, and we got a needlepoint when we got married, and we got a quilt a number of years later. Artistic is for A, artistic, that's so clear, and then also A is for adventuresome. She was really up for getting out and seeing the world, and I was so impressed by all the places that they went in the U.S., in the world, and even including Antarctica. I just couldn't believe it when they went there. Thought that was so brave. I is for intelligent, of course. Gail, as you heard, completed 4 degrees, including a doctorate, and also inviting. She invited people into their home, had foreign exchange students, invited people into her family after my father died pretty young. My mother was invited to come to events, which was so very kind. And then Elle is loving. She was thoughtful, caring. As Bert and I grew up and got married and raised our own family, they were really both always there to help us when we needed them, and there were definitely times when we did. She was just really an amazing support and so loving. So after I finished the letters and her name for the card, then I also added family leader, because in so many ways she brought us together to do really fun things like our family cabin, Bakugan that Bob mentioned, and also the leader in the times when her mother was failing, and she really did so much to facilitate her over the years, her life. And then also family leader and party giver. So as you've heard, I have years, and we all do, of memories of holiday parties, baby shower, bridal showers, other fun gatherings hosted by Gail. She would be at the door, welcome, big smile, just wonderful to go to Gail and Stu's. I have an older sister in my family, and I have two younger sisters who mean the world to me. Gail was an older sister that was a role model for me, and she so positively impacted my life. I miss her. I'm grateful for all that she did for me. Thank you, Gail.
I'm Lily Taylor, and I am Gail's niece. Growing up in this family, I quickly learned that getting married wasn't just about finding the love of your life. Oh no, it was about something far more important, and that would be receiving your quilt from Gail Hanson. To me, nothing else mattered. I started getting nervous in my early 20s, thinking, what if I never get married? I even asked my mom one day, this marriage thing, what if it's not for me? Is there another way to earn my quilt? So when I was 27, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. I was terrified and heartbroken, but just before I started radiation chemo, my parents hosted a gathering for me at their house. That's the day I received my Gail quilt, lovingly filled with the names and fabric picked out by all of my friends and family. That quilt became my lifeline. I wrapped myself around it every time I felt sick, scared, or alone. 5 years later, and in complete remission, I married the love of my life. And wouldn't you know it, I was lucky enough to get a second famous Gail Hanson quilt. So Kevin, if you're ever wondering why I married you, just know it's your, it's your positive outlook on life, your contagious sense of humor, and the quilt didn't hurt. Gail didn't just make quilts. She stitched love, comfort, and connection into everyone. Her quilts will continue to wrap us all in the warmth of her memory, reminding us of her kindness and her incredible heart.
My name is Linnea Forsell. I'm on the Bach side of the family, which is Gail's grandmother. Gail, of course, was one of 6 children, and my mother and Gail's mother, and there were 6 in that family. And we always felt really a part of that whole Bach family, and that's where the name Bakugan came from. It's B-A-C-K, which you might think is back, but of course the Swedish heritage came through, and it's Bach. And then, of course, our cabin was on Namakagan, and so it was Bakugan. So you can, two senses in that, where we are Bakugan.
We would spend, when we finally moved into the cities with my sister, and we would, of course, go over to Hilder's for the lutefisk Christmas and the October birthday parties. And so we really felt included in this family, and it became part of our family. I do remember it was in early 1990s when Gail came to us and said, well, do you want to go in with us on this cabin? And I go, well, I don't know. We'd have to look at our finances and decide if this was something that we could do. And she organized the whole thing. I mean, she found the cabin. According to Stuart, when she saw it, she said, this is it. And so she organized her brothers and Dick Shapiro, Sue's brother and his wife, and we went in on this cabin, and she would collect the mortgages and make sure that all the bills got paid. And we had wonderful times. We expanded some of the outbuildings and made a bunkhouse thanks to Bert's architectural expertise, and had a bunkhouse she had somebody put on skylights so that. And then Stu and Gail were in charge of the boats, pretty much. And we had a big deck boat, and then finally we had a pontoon, and we'd tootle around Lake Namakagan, which is a pretty good-sized lake up by Cable. And then when that kind of went by the ways, then they decided they were going to have their own cabin. So then she actually, if you read the obituary, she actually did the architectural drawings for this log cabin, which went up on Jackson Lake, which is right on an inlet to Namakagan. A couple of remembrances. I remember one time we went up there just to visit, because by this time we had a condo in Hayward, which is just a half an hour away. And we just, every night we would take our hors d'oeuvres and munchies and we'd go out on a pontoon ride. So we were tootling around Jackson Lake for a while, and then we decided to go over to Namakagan, and there's this inlet that goes between the two lakes, and all of a sudden, we ran out of gas. And Gail said, did you put more gas in the gas tank? And no, we didn't. So we didn't have any gas. And so then we were trying to decide what we were going to do. And Gail said, it's not my responsibility, I'm not taking it. So then she went to the back of the boat and started reading. And so the other ones of us were trying to figure out, well, how are we going to get back to the cabin? And Stuart was thinking he might jump in and try to push the pontoon that was probably maybe a half a mile back to the cabin. And then we were thinking we could throw the anchor in and then pull it, because we didn't have a paddle, of course, you know. Well, finally somebody came along and gave us a tow. And so it was just a wonderful family, no recriminations, and I couldn't be more thankful, and will always remember all of the good times we had together.
As Linnea said, I'm also Gail's cousin. I'm Carolyn, and I've always been very, very grateful to be included in all these family gatherings, because our parents died when we were still in our 20s, and Gail and Stuart always thought about us. As has already been said, Gail loved words, but not just any words. She loved words that were or are precise, evocative, and words that stimulate the imagination, words that help us to think more deeply. It is no surprise then that Emily Dickinson was one of Gail's favorite poets. Marta told me that she marked this poem that I'm going to read in one of her books. It's a poem about life cycles, beginning with the approach of autumn and ending with the possibility of immortality. Most of Emily Dickinson's poems do not have actual titles because she really didn't publish when she was living. She just wrote down on envelopes or pieces of paper or whatever and shoved them in drawers, and it wasn't until after she died that people began to realize how prolific she was. So this poem is entitled 1682. And it's about the change of the seasons. And if you've ever been to northwestern Wisconsin in the fall, you can imagine what Emily Dickinson is talking about here. Summer begins to have the look, peruser of enchanting book, reluctantly but sure perceives a gain upon the backward leaves. Autumn begins to be inferred by millinery of the cloud or deeper color in the shawl that wraps the everlasting hill. The eye begins its avarice, a meditation chastens speech. Some dyer of a distant tree resumes his gaudy industry. Conclusion is the course of all, at most to be perennial, and then elude stability, recalls to immortality. Thank you, Gail, for being who you were to all of us.
Thank you. I invite you to join with me now in the spirit of prayer and meditation. We gather as people of different faiths and varied traditions, bound together by a shared love and a shared grief. May we settle ourselves now in gratitude for the spirit of life and love that brings us together. As we share in this space of quiet and connection, we extend our care to Gail's whole family as they and their lives adjust now to this empty space that Gail used to inhabit. May comfort and care be with them as they carry the grief and gratitude of her life and love. We give thanks for this gathered community, for the practices that Gail modeled throughout her life, of welcoming adventure and learning, of marking milestones, answering the call to creativity, to conversation, to joy, to travel, to yeses and nos, and following the longings of her life. May we be strengthened in our own lives, in our own living, by the gift of being a part of hers. And may we bring to our lives the kind of appreciation and gratitude that Gail knew in her living, naming herself fortunate again and again, without the need to know what happens next, but living simply in gratitude for what is right now and the gift of getting to be a part of it. May this spirit be with us now and always. Amen. And I invite us to join in singing, if you like, hymn number 123. It's in the larger of your hymnal books, and the lyrics will be up as well. If you'd like to rise, you are welcome to do so, and join us in singing. justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. You may be seated.
Gail was a force of nature, smart, strong, beautiful, classy, and committed. She lived a life of purpose. Some of the earliest memories I have include Gail. I remember when I was in 3rd grade, I was asked to sing at my great Uncle Art's funeral. I picked a couple of songs from the musical Annie to sing with no accompaniment. And I remember as I stood in the center of the church, in the center aisle, getting a little nervous, I happened to lock eyes with Gail. And as others were sort of whispering how cute it was that this little girl was going to sing a song, I remember Gail sitting straight up in the pew and raising her chin at me as if to say, "Stand tall and belt it out." Which is what I did. And afterwards, I remember Gail telling me that I was poised. I wasn't even exactly sure what that word meant, poised. But I never forgot that. And now I'm a mother myself, and some of my fondest memories of Gail continue, like when she and all the Hansons showed my kids and my partner Jack and me Camp de Nord up in Ely, Minnesota. Thank you for showing us that community and its pristine environment. That place reflects who she was. Gail was a role model. Through her work and life, she committed to gender equity and paving the way for a better future. Because Gail's art wasn't just in her quilts, it was the way she lived her life. She taught us the importance of giving back and the strength of standing up for what we believe in. Today, as we remember her, our warmth is with you, Stu, and Peter and Halen and Marta and Kelly and the whole family. Gail will always be a part of us, woven into the fabric of our lives, just like the beautiful quilts she created. And just as she once encouraged a little girl to stand tall and sing, Gail's spirit remains poised within each of us, inspiring us to live with grace, purpose, and conviction. Rest in peace, Gail. I will miss you, but your legacy endures.
Gail was one of those people in life who saved me. And I think we all have people like that who save us. And she did it in small and large ways. But I wrote a short poem reflection for her. And it's called More, which is what my children called her. They called her More, and they called Stuart Farfar. More, Swedish for grandmother. You and Farfar, our first visitors to the hospital when our son was born. You brought fragrant lotions and thick socks to pamper the mother, placing care and attention on me when all my focus was on another. At our home inspection, you sat on the deck and held my son, so I could walk the perimeter, listening to instructions. And on a dark winter day, you stopped over, holding a snowman family, carrying evergreen wreaths, representing all of us, Mom, Dad, 3 children. Watching you hold my daughter, hoping she'll grow up to be like you. Saturday mornings, you taught my daughter how to push thick fabric through the needle, explaining the mathematical precision of the bright quilt pattern. Your heads bent over the machine, her brown bob, your silvery white bob. You showed up to her grandparents' day at middle school, the first time she doesn't stay in the classroom while everyone gathers in the gym. Watching you walk hand in hand with Farfar, showing us true love. Your love, expanding far beyond loved ones, and like the pinwheel designs in your quilts, continuing to spread its radiant beauty out into the world.
Mormor was an adoptive grandmother to me and my siblings. I know her as that and stewardess Farfar eternally. Some of my fondest childhood memories are with those two, from childhood Christmas parties to memories at the cabins, learning how to fish. But I would say my fondest memories to this day are when Mormor taught me how to sew. When I was 8 and also when I was 12, we would spend hours, summer afternoons together, learning how to quilt. These days were incredibly important to me. She showed me so much. She showed me creativity, letting me pick out a beautiful pattern and the different colors of neon green and turquoise blue, which were my favorite at the time. She taught me patience, especially when I had to redo stitches 3 to 5 different times. And she taught me how to care for others. She would tell me stories of the different quilts that she was making for the people that she cared about. I carry Mormor in so much that I do. I was elated to learn that I joined her sorority, Gamma Phi Beta, and to this day, when my friends ask me to patch up jeans for them, or my mom asks me to stitch a comforter, I think of her and the lessons that she taught me. Mormor taught me how to properly care for others, and I carry her with me in all the different ways that I do that. Thank you.
I'm going to reveal a very surprising part of Gail's life, in that Gail and I met in a nunnery. It's true. It was the late 1970s. Gail and I both had contracts with the Special Education Department of Minneapolis Public Schools, whose offices were located in the former living quarters of an order of Catholic nuns. The beds were gone, of course, but the building's history was visible in countless ways in our daily comings and goings. There is frankly little that I remember about the specifics of our jobs, but I do clearly recall our friendship. Those were years when women were bursting with special vigor into the world of professional jobs and offices, and I remember several conversations we sat in our tiny cloistered little spaces. Conversations with Gail and other women staffers about which sewing patterns offered the best options for professional yet womanly attire. Our choices were Buttrick, Simplicity, McCall's, and of course, if we really wanted to splurge, Vogue. I see lots of smiles in front of me. Shoulder pads in the shape of lapels in our blazers were particular objects of uncertainty. Little did we realize how those early thoughts about needles, patterns, etc., would grow into the amazing works of art that we see downstairs. Gail and I were aware that we were certainly not on the cutting edge of feminism. We were doing quite well in the world that we had entered. One day, Gail arrived with a new piece of information. I don't remember the exact figures, but she had just learned that average women's incomes were less than $20,000 a year. We were quietly amused and frankly pleased to know that our incomes of $24,000 put us in the top 10% of women in the nation. Another particular memory of that time was attendance at a seminar with a local futurist, Earl Joseph, who claimed that in our lifetimes, we would all be wearing on our wrists little watch-sized machines so powerful as to contain the content of a full set of the Encyclopedia Britannica. We glanced at one another, bemused by the need that some people have such outrageous needs to exaggerate. When I left that job, Gail and I saw little of one another until February 1981, when my husband Tony and I decided to start a book group. Our immediate challenge, of course, was whom to invite, and I quickly knew that Gail Hanson was at the top of that list. I didn't really know her husband, Stu, but he was likely worth the risk. And so began 43 years of reading together. About Gail, she was a generous host and such a good cook. She had a fun sense of humor and loved the group's chatter of family and politics. She was fiercely supportive of Stu, with little patience for anyone who took issue with his point of view. Most especially, I regard Gail as uniquely brave to carve out her own way of success, stepping aside from the academic degrees, the $24,000 salaries, the professional networks, to declare that needlepoint, quilts, cabin decor, and Riverview amenities were her path toward expression, creativity, and generosity. I was then and still am impressed. Finally, in her final years, Gail was fervid in her self-proclaimed rule that no book group selection, no matter how strongly recommended, could exceed 300 pages. Footnotes, index, table of contents accepted. Stu, Peter, Marta, Kelly, thank you for sharing Gail with us.
I'm Dick King, and I'm also in Ruth Ann's book group now, so it gets to be a big group. My wife Lois and I moved to Minneapolis in 1965, and we moved to South Minneapolis in 1971. We had been playing bridge, sort of, for a few years and continued playing occasionally with friends that we had made through the medical community or the university community. And so I get ready for this. I went through my wife's storage of beautiful old calendars, going back to 1963 when we got married, actually. Looking over the old calendars, this included playing bridge with Stu and Gail Hanson occasionally, with Dodd and Ginger Wilson occasionally, and by 1972, we had been playing off and on with these various friends. But the first mention of the bridge group actually was in the calendar in 1974. And it included the Hansons, the Wilsons, another couple, the Hansons, George and Karen Hanson, Peggy and Dave Lucas, and a sixth couple that has sort of come and gone, but we really had a core of five. And some of the early history is a bit vague, and others will remember this differently than me, I presume. But these are my memories. The group's been getting together since 1974 or so, and has become the Bridge Group. To our families and our friends, they all know us as the Bridge Group. Our children have grown up knowing that they are part of the Bridge Group, and they are the Bridge Group kids. And although they may not be socially close, they all know each other. In fact, several have dated at different times. This is an amazing group that was formed Think of life what was like, as others have said, in the 1960s and the 1970s. Here's a group of dedicated and hardworking women and men with greatly different interests and skills that they enjoy getting together. They loved education because many of us were attached to schools, and they obviously had spent a lot of time at school. There were 5 MDs, 2 PhDs, 5 or more with master's degrees. People had spent a lot of time going to school in this group. The women were all strong and successful when that was not always easy. It was very beneficial, a very beneficial environment for our children. Gail was a teacher, a person who others turned to for leadership, and a master quilter. Over the years, the Bridge Group traveled to our cabins when we were in our cabin phase, to Little Rock, Arkansas, to visit Dodd and Ginger Wilson. Dodd had become the dean and then chancellor at the University of Arkansas Medical School. And we went there to celebrate the Minnesota Twins when they won each World Series. And part of the group actually went to Churchill to see the polar bears back on an amazing trip. 3 couples went along. However, the best part was just getting together with old friends. Our bridge playing started out strong, and we even went through a phase where we played duplicate bridge, complete with the boards, and could actually score them, particularly with Dr. Wilson, who was able to keep the score. But this faded, and we just ended up eating and drinking and visiting most of the time. However, we never changed the name of the Bridge Group. It was always the Bridge Group. So here we are celebrating Gail's amazing life. We have been enriched with her friendship and delighted with all the things that she has shown us and has done, like the amazing quilts that we can see downstairs here today, and we will miss her, the Bridge Group.
Good afternoon. Oh, I guess I'll wait till everybody's. Good afternoon. I want to extend our condolences to the Hanson family and extended family. I'm Carolyn Fronick, and I'm representing the League of Women Voters in Minneapolis. Myself and all of the other members, some of whom are here today, knew Gail as a steady hand when she was president in the latter years of the last century, the late 1990s. One League friend commented that she exhibited leadership when faced with making tough decisions. That was especially true when funds were an issue for our small nonprofit. I served under her presidency as Vice President of Development. Volunteers like Gail remain the centerpiece of League work. She opened her cozy kitchen to meetings on membership. Stuart and she offered their Wisconsin cabin for silent auctions, and it sold for a high price, I might add. She moderated forums and neighborhood elections. When the Somalis first settled in Minneapolis, several of us recall Gail leading an event at the Brian Coyle Center. A quote from one of our members said that there was a whole room full of voters, seemingly all named Mohammed, and Gail was cool, calm, and friendly. She created quilts, as you know, from all the stories before, and even helped me select fabric to complete a quilt that featured squares of U.S. historical figures that my grandmother had embroidered. She also, at the end of the project, added the trim to the final quilt that I had put together, and somehow acquiesced to add a wider border, which was apparently prohibited in the quilt industry. Gail created a large, beautiful, politically significant quilt for display at the League of Women Voters National Convention in Minneapolis in 2006, and then donated it, according to lore, to the National League. It was comprised of squares, 50 for all the states, and the year that they ratified the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Mississippi became the last state in 1984. Gail proved to be a true champion for League of Women Voters, not only in Minneapolis, but in the nation. And we cherished her work and remember her fondly. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jan Albers, a former sorority sister of Gail's. Gail and I also, when we graduated from the University of Minnesota, drove from Minnesota to California to San Francisco, where we got our first jobs. And I've got fond memories of that trip. I'm going to read a poem that Gail really liked. It was presented to her by her friend, I know it's here, Ruth Keller Weaver gifted this poem to Gail, and she has it framed hanging in their cabin up in Wisconsin. The poem is called Someone Like You. Someone like you makes the heart seems the lighter. Someone like you makes the day's work worthwhile. Someone like you makes the sun shine the brighter. Someone like you makes the sigh half a smile. Life's an odd pattern of briars and roses. Clouds sometimes darken, no sun shining through. Then the cloud lifts, the sunlight discloses, near to me, dear to me, someone like you.
Hello, I'm Nedra Nichols. I too was a Gamma Phi sister of Gail's. We met when we first started the university together. She was from Minneapolis and I was from St. Paul. And it was a lovely gathering of lovely friendships that we made through the years, I think close to 70 years now. We have a friend in Berkeley, California that we've gone to visit every now and then. And it's all been a wonderful, wonderful ride. I have a poem to read from Emily Dickinson, who was also my mother's very favorite. And I think it's because of the way she uses her words. They're wonderful. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'd advertise, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public like a frog. To tell one's name the livelong June. To an admiring bog. It's a lovely poem, and she was a lovely writer. Thank you for sharing this day together.
We are full of gratitude for all of these remembrances from the different parts of Gail's life. And as we prepare to close our time together, I want to invite you to join us downstairs after the service for a reception, for a chance to see some more of the beautiful artwork and quilts, for some food, for continuing to share memories and stories together. We hope you'll join us. And we close today with words that Gail turned to for wisdom and comfort, words that were on a framed card on her cabin dresser drawers. Let the seasons turn, let the petals fall and the leaves drop. Let the weightless earth spin beneath us and start it all again. What does time matter when you know that love is forever? May the love that is forever be our comfort and our companion, now and in all the days ahead. May it be so. Amen.
playing some of my favorites.